So, because I talked about the COVID-19 pandemic and what's happening with exploration, operations and all that. I just like to get an idea. Now that you all seem to be very well funded to generate news flow and that, what's your ability to do it, and how has COVID-19 impacted your ability, to execute your plan? I'll start with Darwin.
Thanks, Joe. Good question. I think off the top, for us as a company, from management through board, we've taken it very seriously in terms of what it means for how we operate and decisions to operate and the plans that we have in place to mitigate, any issues and transmission to the communities within where we operate. One of the things that we have good fortunes is our project, it's remote in a way. It's accessible. Like, we're very close to Anchorage. We can fly in and out very closely, but we're not in and out of small remote communities. And that was a big part of our decision in terms of proceeding. It did, however, delay things by about a month for this season's drilling to ensure we had everything up and running. Everyone gets a lab-based test before they come to site. We've got strict protocols in place, and thus far it's run very well. But that was the key for us, is there was no kind of isolated communities that we would be impacting, and so we're really we're kind of removed from it, and it's things are operating quite well.
Okay, Charles.
Yeah, being in a similar location to Darwin, we're in a similar scenario. It might be a surprise to most people, but Alaska's taking it very seriously, which is not as, it's just quite a contrast to the lower 48 states. So we're fortunate that Unger Island is where we've built our camp. So we're isolated in our work processes. So we've got some strict guidelines in place as we travel to site. But then we're essentially in isolation as geos and drillers going about our exploration. But I do emphasise Darwin's point about the seriousness of managing this as a management team and a board.
Right, because reputational risk is important, because you're in there for the long term and you don't want to spoil anything, going forward. Garrett, I've obviously driven to your project a few times, so in terms of COVID-19, less impacts. But we've also seen, not just how you actually explore, but and some people are now having longer terms in the field and that, but also rig availability. And Darwin talked about assay turnarounds. How has that impacted what you guys are doing in Central BC?
Just to reiterate both what Darwin and Charles said, obviously we take it extremely serious, this COVID. I don't think you have to, but we were probably a month we shut down as one of the First Nations bands there, the Coldwater, which we work closely with. We have about 8 employees from there. They had a mandatory 2-week quarantine, which I thought was a great thing to do. And that's when we took the break as well. But obviously we're in a pretty fortunate place on a world scale, having Dr. Bonnie Henry, and BC's done a pretty good job. But yeah, you got to be careful. We have all the protocols in place, hand washing, masks if need be, and obviously we stay as far away from one another as you possibly can. Obviously on a drill rig it's a little bit different, but I know it's obviously it had some impact, but I think we're doing the best we can, really.
And Patty, you're in a different perspective. You're not handling, an exploration program at this moment, but your Ermitaño royalty, which conceptually was supposed to come into production, or first pour maybe before the end of the year, has now been delayed, and First Majestic has announced it. So some of your royalties are being impacted. So how has COVID impacted your plan, and also potentially layering on what's happened with your M&A transaction and how that got together during the pandemic?
Being in 3 different jurisdictions has been a bit of a challenge, right from sort of the office environment all the way on through to our exploration activities. And you're right, we don't have the exploration activities to the level of some of the other speakers here, but we do and continue to generate projects with boots on the ground. And so, we've had to manage that in Mexico, especially in this time of year when you've got extreme heat temperatures. along with having people working in the field, it's been a challenge of, getting up exceptionally early in the morning, getting your work done, but, not staying in hotels, not going into restaurants, in working in the field, which, being remote, as Darwin said, is a benefit. Same goes for Nevada. Our teams have been largely out of hotels and working and camping in the field, and up in British Columbia here. As Gareth had mentioned, you've got to work with your local community. And in our case, we've been, working with the Tahltan and talking to them, making sure that our protocols are up to a standard that's acceptable to them before we enter any camp in any jurisdiction within their territory.
Yeah, so we've had an idea what's happening in Alaska, central BC, and what Orogen's doing in different parts of North America. It's nice to get a perspective of what's actually happening in places like Australia. And from what I understand from other people there, is that state by state, they're actually handling it different, and each state seems to be closing their borders. So Peter and Stephen, so how does that impact what you guys are doing in Australia?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Look, I think as a whole, Australia's handled it very well. We probably got on the front foot. Mining and some sort of critical services got sort of exemptions, so there was a bit more freedom for mining people to move around and carry on, mining and agriculture to carry on as normal. Obviously, again, partly because a lot of those activities are remote. GBM's probably fortunate. Most of the work we were doing in the sort of peak of the sort of first wave was desktop work, getting ready for drilling. And the other thing that's fortunate is we've got actually staff in Queensland, we've got staff in Victoria, and we've got the operating asset in South Australia with staff. So we've actually got people in each of the states, so there wasn't a lot of movement required. And the guys, the only sort of small delay we had on commissioning the plant in White Dam to get gold production and copper production moving was just some pumps and equipment, delays due to just delivery timeframes blowing out a little bit out of Germany and a few other places, but otherwise no real impacts, and no issues with getting drill rigs moving in Queensland. So.
And you're actually drilling right now, you're Stephen, is that right, at Mount Coolon?
That's right. Press release out a couple of days ago. Drill rigs active. The Mount Coolon project is really quite isolated, so the impact there on anyone is very limited. And active teams, as Peter has mentioned, are all sourced within state. Look, we're also actively exploring in Victoria at the moment as well, but with local teams there. So we really have had no real delay to our exploration programs to date, and everything's flowing quite smoothly.
Okay, let's transition to like what I was talking about in my presentation, the current market. We had gold and silver, and also a lot of other metals move up since the mid-March low of the impact of COVID on global growth. But going forward, I guess, and what you guys are seeing, because all of you have either raised money or done a significant transaction over the last several months since the low in mid-March. So I just to get your opinion, because you guys have all taken meetings and talked to people as you've raised money or done a transaction, about what you see right now in the current market. So I'll start with Darwin, who obviously raised money and now is generating news flow. So Darwin, what's your take on what's happening right now in the current market for juniors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what scale you look at it. Obviously, it's been a very good year for the gold space, and it continued to get stronger on the financing side of things. It seems like August was a little bit of a lull, but I expect September and October here for things to fire back up again as significant results are delivered to the market. I mean, there should be a wave of excellent discoveries that come out of all this money that's been raised. I think for HighGold specifically, we saw an awful lot of interest. We upsized our financing. We had a significant amount of additional interest beyond that. So I think there's a little bit of requirement for the juniors to be a little bit more careful and cautious, and not just take everything, because it's going to come back into the markets eventually, and pick your shareholders wisely. We are fortunate to be able to do 2 financings without warrants, so we're pretty comfortable when stuff comes free trading that we're not going to get hit too hard. But I think there's a definite pivot to more generalists showing up, and that's it doesn't take much of a percentage of generalist money to have a major impact, and it feels like there's a lot of it doesn't feel like it's slowing down anyways.
Right. So you're seeing generalists into the juniors right now. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. There were certainly new names popping up that weren't there before, and yeah, for sure. And I mean, to me, I felt like there's sort of like a mini cycle. Right after March, it started with the majors, and then it kind of worked to the developers, and then it finally made its way to the explorers. That was a fairly compressed cycle, but where that money flow happened, and it feels like it's round 2 of that's happening now again. As the gold price went up over 2,000, I think you're going to see a sort of a second round of that, and maybe a third.
Ooh. But to Charles, who's done a transformational M&A transaction on a company that's been around for quite a few years, you've raised money as well. But truth be told, almost everybody's raised money. You're like an anomaly if you haven't raised money, basically, right now in the junior sector. So how do you distinguish yourself from a lot of this money that's flowing into the sector for projects that may or may not make as much sense as yours? How do you try to stand out?
That's a very good question, Joe. I think conferences like this are a step towards that. We did the same thing that Darwin mentioned. We raised $7 million without a warrant. I think we stopped told people to stop sort of putting in orders at about $12.5 million book for that, which speaks to the strength of the market. And as you said, a lot of people can raise money, and it has to be done because risk capital is the lifeblood of our business. It's then what gets done with that money. So I think it's the companies that have the projects that really have potential. And unfortunately, that can be very hard for some investors to distinguish between. So I'm a little agnostic on metal prices. I prefer, with my background, to pick high margin projects, because yes, the gold and silver prices move materially, but you will see, as has happened every time before, that costs come up behind that. So ultimately, the margin stays pretty steady. So our bias is to look for high margin projects like Unga and like the Mexican portfolio, because they'll make money at any point in the cycle. So I actually stay a little agnostic on that side. And hopefully you see the money that's coming in. There'll be a lot wasted, unfortunately, but the companies with the better projects can hopefully create some real value.
Right, and that's partially, not partially, that's the reason, I sort of selected you guys, because, that's downside protection if there is something that happens when all this flood of paper comes out in November and everybody's seen in the same light, and then there's a potential to pick up things that you really like. But to the other point is that, Garrett, you didn't raise money recently, you raised money previously, but I guess now you're putting out the largest program that, this project that you guys have held for almost 10 years, I'd say, which was usually a program of about a couple thousand meters a year, with a, 30,000 meter program with more rigs. So is that what this market is looking for? Is, a lot of news flow that hits, while sentiment is high? Because I take Charles's point that we should be metal agnostic when we're making these, discoveries, that we're finding high margin projects, because most of these gold companies, the majors, have their reserves priced at $1,200, $1,250. A lot of the projects that are raising money, or the companies with these projects, are not $1,250 projects. Banks, in terms of development, are not using $1,700 gold for their reserve, for their business plans. They're using still, maybe if you're lucky, $1,400. So how do you, again, distinguish yourself, in terms of, you're a project, good jurisdiction, cheap drilling, given your infrastructure, how do you get the word out? In terms of, is it just discovery? You just pin your ears back and do things like, find things like the Franz zone, find something new.
You know what? I think it is that simple, and this may come across as I'm trying to make an excuse or something, but you're only as good as your last drill hole. And when we had our success in late 2018, we were really one of the only big sort of new discoveries at the time, and put Great Bear in there, of course, which is obviously a different story. But and nowadays, when it comes to you put out some decent results, you extend your strike length, but unless you're hitting 400 or 500 gram meter intercepts, it's tough to follow up on that. So for us, it's finding a new zone. We've said that before, and I think once we do, we're off to the races. And I think we're on the cusp of doing that again. Time will tell, but this is it. It's exploration. You got to be a bit. It's hard to say that to the average, investor. I'm one too, in a lot of these companies here. It's hard to sometimes be patient and wait, but that's sort of for us. It sounds a bit like a cop out, if you will, but that's for us. It's finding another zone that's going to take this from, as you have, 500,000 ounces to 2 million plus ounces, which people really want. They want scalability, including the people we're talking to these days a lot, as Darwin was saying there. You're getting a lot more generalists in, or people who are we're talking all sorts of different people now, and they all want something a little bit different. But for us, it really is that next drill hole that I think is going to take us to the next level.
The other question I would have for you, Garrett, is, like with what, Darwin did is, last year when he took hold of this, and I don't want to, pump his tires right now, but what he did was he established a base in the updated resource at GT, but he's JT, sorry, at the JT deposit, just to say, okay, this is something you can hold on to, but I'm going here, and I'm trying to build it, but I've got this. So in terms of volatility, which we all know that the volatility of these markets is real, and hence why everybody wants to get money now, because tomorrow it might look very different. But is there some kind of strategy, or let's say rationale to establishing that resource that I, sort of calculated, but it's obviously not compliant. It's a dart at the South Zone, to say, ooh, I've got South Zone, I'm looking for more of these, but look at what this one is. So let's say I try to find 2 or 3 more of this, but right now the market doesn't know what this is.
Yep. No, that's an excellent point. And we're hearing a lot being on, lots of road shows and quotations there on Zoom calls, but we're getting a lot of that from new funds who are listening to our story, and they want to have something to bring to their clients and say, yeah, you got this in the ground, you got this for that. They want that confidence in it. So I think if we can prove something at Franz, and that will give us something to work on there, then we can go back and likely put something, some sort of inferred resource. We're almost there. We're not far from that, but we probably will look to see what we're looking at there in the near future. That's just what people are we want to listen to our shareholders and potential investors, and that's what we're getting a lot of. So it's certainly something where it's in the it's on the horizon.
Okay. And Patty, you completed a transformational transaction while all this was going on. I'm not sure how the market impacted that, because this might have been something you might have preferred to do at $1,200 gold, because one, your royalty is coming onto production soon, and the other one is a royalty on potentially a large deposit. We need a high gold price, as it's already got a major in there. So I'd like to know, what we're seeing right now, as you noted, is that we see a lot of royalty companies coming into this space, because we have Franco, we have Wheaton, we have Royal Gold, and now Ely, and now we have 3 or 4 other ones jumped into it because their cost of capital is next to nothing, and they get to buy these portfolio of royalties in large companies that don't get any value for it. that is not what you are doing. So how are you, I guess, distinguishing yourself?
Yeah.
Because your model is more like an EMX model with
Yes.
a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head there. The two sort of pathways we have for royalty acquisition is one of, the organic royalty generation through our efforts that we have historically achieved as a prospect generator. And over the past 10 years, both companies have been, pretty busy establishing their craft in the Western Cordillera. And so, shifting the deals that we did in the past, maybe with a greater focus on actual royalties, and maybe letting the earn-in partner earn more of the project, earn it sooner, but they're going to pay for it, and they're going to pay it, with cash. They're going to pay it with royalties, and so it gives us a bit of a good segue into creating multiple royalties fairly quickly. And that's something I think that is a fairly strong differentiation for most of them. Granted, EMX is in this space too, but the business model isn't being overused at the moment. There's not a lot of players. And then on the other side, as you mentioned, Joe, is that you're right. There's a lot of groups out there that have access to capital cheaper than we do. And so I don't see a benefit in Orogen trying to compete on that level when our cost of capital is quite high still. And so, using the I guess the skill sets that we have is on a technical level, it's on a business development level, and the Western Cordillera is a pretty big part of the world to work in. We're very experienced in all areas, and we have a lot of good insight onto projects, deposits, who's working in the areas, who owns projects. So it gives us a bit of an ability to go in and target singular high quality projects and assets that we think will be more successful in obtaining rather than buying a basket of royalties.
So now moving to Australia and the ASX, different market compared to what we were seeing in North America. So how do you, Peter and Stephen, see, what's happening in your market and how that, drives what you do? Because, I'm not sure if you're calling yourself a prospect generator or anything like that. You just do have a portfolio of assets, but the asset, your flagship assets where you're focusing on, you're drilling it yourself, you're consolidating the ground yourself. But from my, experience in Australia and when I've been, at other conferences down there, the prospector generator model, ASX listed, wasn't something that really had a lot of traction. So how do you deal with that on the ASX listing, or is that driving you to go outside of the ASX, or do you think you can manage within that listing with this model?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Look, I think the Australian market's a bit funny at the moment. There's probably two key areas where funding seems to be pouring in. One is obviously, resource ounce, building resource ounces, and WA, De Grey and some of the companies over there that are, finding ounces very quickly are getting a lot of market attention and a lot of funding for drilling out, resources. But then there's this sort of slight anomaly in Victoria where obviously, the Canadians and North Americans have come in and you're seeing Fosterville South with, incredible market cap with no ounces, Kalamazoo next door to us, just really starting to drill and no resource space with, very high market caps. So we're definitely seeing, even in our shareholder base, some people like the Victorian story more than the Mount Coolin story. So there's definitely two sort of ponds at the moment of where money's be willing to be thrown around or available. Probably the only other thing I'd quickly make a comment and then hand over to Steve is there's also a little bit of a shift now that things like copper are starting to see a little bit more attraction, and more IPOs are starting to get away. And so I think, the one thing GBM has a little bit of a strength is we've got quite a big portfolio, and we can pivot a little bit if the market gets soft in, just drilling out, new ounces. We can focus on Victoria, or we can focus on our copper gold portfolio. So we've got a little bit of flexibility there. Steve, any other comments?
Yeah, look, I think the important points for me are that are we a prospect generator? No, we're focused on drilling out our flagship project, but the strength from that I bring from my experience is that I understand that model really well, and I can bring that model into Australia. And I think you're right, Joe. It's just a substantial advantage here for the kind of symbiotic deals that exist in North America to be brought to Australia. We started to do that with our Novo deal. It's a very important source of capital for us to be able to bring that big project portfolio alive. And a junior company can't fund all of their projects. We've made a very strategic decision to focus on Mount Coolon, not just because we think we can accretively acquire a 1 million ounce base within that trucking halo, and we have lots of exploration, but it's very explorable and very developable, where we're bringing in funds not just from the ASX and the Australian space, but as you know, we've been very successful at bringing funds in from North America and Europe as well, and that's where my experience lends a bit of an advantage for GBM. And we've also underpinned a significant amount of our cost through the cash flow that we'll be generating from White Dam. So, in the Australian space, we're quite different for an early stage junior, that we have cash flow. We've been very successful at raising funds, and we've got funding coming in from strong joint ventures. So it's a very good and strong combination for us to be able to move this company forward. I think we'll continue to look both internally and externally for funding to go forward. And we're just seeing very, very strong interest because we're in a very explorable and mining-friendly jurisdiction, particularly in Queensland.
Okay, we got less than 5 minutes, but what I wanted to do is get quickly an idea. Like, one of the themes that I was talking about in my presentation was potential M&A, either on the strategic alliances, the joint ventures, potential private placements by majors or intermediates, because they're dwindling reserves. But layering on COVID-19, pandemic, travel restrictions, ice, that sort of things. Like, how does that work in terms of right now potential M&A suitors, due diligence, and things like that you're seeing? Not that it might be important right now for you, because all of you are drilling and moving your own business plans forwards, but do you see a lot of that? I'll start with Darwin.
Well, it's definitely impacting travel plans. Most people want to do site tours. I'm actually hosting an analyst site tour today, immediately following this, and it was tough. I managed to get one guy because all the banks have got policies that limit travel. So it has its impacts for sure.
Charles, I guess you're really not seeing that because you're just sort of establishing yourself right now. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so we haven't had those conversations with the mid-tiers and majors, although interestingly enough, it's amazing how many sort of alternative projects or financing of bank groups with projects are coming across. When you've got funding, people are coming to you saying, I've got this project, I've got that, would you like to do something? So how to execute that hasn't been a focus, but we have seen quite a bit of interest at that level saying, are you interested in these projects?
Right. And from, I guess from Garrett's perspective, it's rather easy if your potential suitor or the interested parties in Canada, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate for our location, obviously, but to reiterate what the others are saying, there's certainly been more challenging. Even, some banks or analysts don't want to fly out even from Toronto. So, but being in Vancouver, a 2.5-hour drive, as you know, Joe, it's we've certainly been more fortunate on that end for people coming up. We've done a handful of site tours this summer already. So yeah.
All right, just so you know, I go to your site visits every now and just to get out of the house. So,
we know.
All right. So I've been there for 5 times something. But from Patty's perspective, you've raised money and now you're in a different type of a company, a royalty generator. So you're seeing a lot of inflow as well as anything, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get a lot of submittals now, both still on a project scale, but also royalty scale. There's lots of interest. Our ability to analyze these things at this stage of the game is not bad. I mean, a lot of it's still desktop work, a lot of communication going back and forth. So we haven't really seen much of an impact there. I think that the biggest challenges that we've had is something that Darwin highlighted there about getting people to site. And so when you're trying to get a joint venture established, everybody wants to obviously get on this project and see it for what it is. And the travel restrictions that are mandated by the senior producers or mid-tiers, they can't come to site. So there's a lot of CAs being signed, a lot of data analysis getting done, but just, simply getting it to that next stage is tough.
Yeah, I talked to one of my colleagues or ex-colleagues at Newmont, and they haven't left the office since the middle of March.
Yeah,
on the road a lot.
yeah.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. We're done, and I appreciate everybody for keeping up and listening to the Q&A and all the presentations.